I just thought I'd get all my notes to say thank you again. Thank you each evening, but hello. I was just sitting in Mass there thinking, I just want to remind you, those of you who were kind enough to be here on the first evening, what I said right at the beginning, there is nothing new here. In those odd moments when you feel that I'm saying something that touches you, firstly, that's not me. And secondly, it's because you already know it. The truth speaks to the heart. It's in the tradition of the church. Heart speaks to heart. And I was just sitting in Mass there thinking, these people don't need me to tell them about joy. I just need to remind you, because it's in you. And I know it's in you because I've thoroughly enjoyed the last 3 days. So thank you for being a welcoming community. And I hope you enjoy this last instalment. I'm going to keep my eye on the clock, make sure that we finish at 8 o'clock, because I know you like your food. Today I had something called Boom Boom Sauce. You're going to have to explain that to me later. There's a whole world I don't understand going on here. I hope you understand. So on the first evening I suggested to you that there's a propensity in the human condition to fall asleep. It won't send you to hell, but it will make you miss the point. And that sometimes when we wake up to something that hurts just a little. There's more than one way to wake up, And so on the first evening I suggested to you, just be aware that we have a Pope at the moment who is saying to us that the risk to the church is that we lose our purpose. We become seemingly a people without intent. It won't make us bad, but it will make us useless. On the second evening, I suggested that the Holy Father himself is suggesting to us as a church that one of the remedies of that is to go after the virtues of the gospel. Go after the virtues of Christ. If you go after the virtues, you'll find that the one you pursue will lead to all the others. If you go after mercy, you'll cheer up. If you go after joy, you'll become compassionate. It's how it works. You buy one, you get one free. Okay? So in the tradition of the church, go after the virtues. Put bluntly, cheer up. Okay? Practice being grateful on your own. Listen to the voices of discontent. And when you hear them in your head, pray for healing. And you will recover the child inside you who danced unashamedly once. So tonight what I want to suggest as the third part of this trilogy is that if you have received anything, or are receiving anything, or praying for anything, the ultimate benefit won't be yours. In fact, I'm going to suggest that it never was. A silly little story to illustrate the point, and then we'll begin. After a few years of having left home, I seem to be talking to you a lot about alcohol these 3 months. I found myself in a pub at the other end of England, drinking a pint of beer, and realising, as so often we did, that when I looked back, I wasn't the person I wish I'd been. And I remember sitting in a pub with a few friends, and I realised that perhaps I could have had a slightly better relationship with my dad, particularly in the last few years before I left home, We were together once in a very serious car accident. We always loved each other, but I don't think I was a very nice 20-year-old. I found at 20 years old I knew everything. And I've had to spend the rest of my life realising I didn't really. But I remember ringing my dad up. I suspect I'd had a couple of drinks. And I rang my dad up and I said, Dad, about last year, I want to say two things. I want to say sorry for all of it. And thank you. And he said, thank you? Thank you? You've got no idea. And I remember thinking, this isn't going very well. I thought we were going to have a bonding moment. But then he came out with the wisdom of the church. He would never describe it as such. But it went like this. He said, David, I'm your dad. You don't have to thank me. He says, I love you because I'm your dad. But then he added a gorgeous piece of wisdom. He said, if you've learned anything from me, don't give it back to me. He said, give it to your children. If you've learned anything from me, don't give it back to me. Give it to your children. There is a beautiful, simple illustration of what we call a divine economy. What God gives to you was meant for somebody else. Don't give it back to him. Give it to your neighbour. But my dad said to me, you don't need to thank me, David. If you learn anything from me, be a better dad when your turn comes. Pass it on. It was not for you anyway. And in that way, the world is healed. So here goes. Tonight, we're going to look at these last two, 5 and 6, about how we turn this mission of ours into something that is for everyone. Now, I've got to say, I've got to begin with a language problem, and it's all your fault. See, because I say brilliant, and you say awesome. And the first time somebody told me I was awesome, I was very moved and grateful until I realised that everything over here is awesome. The parking lot's awesome, the coffee's awesome, the speaker's awesome. I still find it difficult to understand that definition. These are words which have confused me and confounded me for some years now. You call it an elevator. Yeah. You see, we'd think we'd speak the same language. Understand why I'm bewildered, ladies and Now this is a problem for me. I mentioned it yesterday. This is probably my favourite. Football is actually soccer. And football is actually over here. A lot of people running in different directions. Now I joke, of course, but we have a translation issue. And that is, can what matters to us matter to someone else? Can what matters to us matter to someone else? Could a mission that revives and enlightens and encourages us actually make a difference to people who are not here? Well, that's the challenge of this. It's the deacon's statement, or the priest's final words. We call it a commissioning. Go and announce the gospel of the Lord. Now, where I live, most people only hear the word go. I know it's different here because I know you rush out and try to find people who need to hear the gospel. But where I live, we just hear the word go. And so I just, building on the last few points, just want you to suppose, be encouraged by this. But the church now says, look, do you know something? All of this communion amongst us is actually meant for the world. And for a long time we didn't think like that. We didn't really see ourselves as disciples. We imagined that we came to church to receive. Well, that was true. But we didn't really imagine that somehow the completion of that receiving would be in giving. That somehow we do love and care for each other, and we love our families, and we do the best we can. But the message of the gift that we receive here was actually meant for the people driving by. Now these, if you notice, I don't know whether any of you take the Pope's tweets. He tweets every day, by the way. And there's a fairly consistent message in them. Being with Jesus demands that we go out from ourselves and from living a tired and habitual faith. Do you notice this pattern that we've been talking about the past 2 days? We can't shut ourselves up in parishes and our communities when so many people are waiting for the gospel. You see, he attributes to it a certain urgency. He wants us to feel a certain urgency that what we're receiving isn't meant for us. Don't give it back to me, David, give it to your kids. Whatever it is that you receive here in this community is meant for someone else. Your own bishops wrote this in 1997 in a beautiful document on stewardship, which has inspired a lot of my talks over the years. They said, Jesus does not call nameless people in a faceless crowd. Jesus calls us individually, every man, woman and child by name, to make a specific, particular and unique contribution. Now here's the thing. When I hear things like that, I can agree with them in my head and have no idea what it is. What is my unique, specific and particular contribution? And then I can be left feeling a bit inadequate. So the rest of this evening is about that, really. That supposing this is an opportunity for movement, not repetition. Or put another way, the Holy Spirit is going to nudge us a little bit, God willing. And notice this movement has 3 parts to it in the scriptures. They're fairly consistent. Don't worry about this. I just need to put these building blocks in before we move on. The recruitment or the call requires 3 things. Hearing a call, leaving something, and following Christ. It's consistent. You see the same thing in the parables. We find something, we sell or leave something, and we buy something. It's the same pattern. There's something about this that's going to change us. Now, I just want to tell you a little story, because I think stories anchor it for me anyway. I had the privilege last year of going to New Zealand. I'd never been there before. It's a long way away from everywhere. It takes 27 hours to get there from Heathrow, with a brief break. So by the time I landed in Auckland, New Zealand, I was very, very jet-lagged. In fact, my brain still can't handle the fact that I went into tomorrow and came out the other side. I always love those sites that show you what time it is all around the world. And there I was dealing with the fact that really I was in tomorrow and my family weren't. It's a very strange world, you know. But when I got off the plane, I was met by a woman and taken in a taxi for a few miles, and then we came to the place where we were to work. And then I was greeted by something called the haka. Have you come across the haka? Okay, if you followed rugby, a sport popular in England, there is a popular New Zealand team called the All Blacks. Whenever you play against the New Zealand All Blacks, they begin the match with the haka. It's a war dance. And it looks a little bit like that. Now, I want to tell you, folks, when you're 3 feet away from it, it is genuinely terrifying. Now, it's meant to be aggressive, and its large eyes big aggressive gestures, and in this case, although not in the picture, I'm going to show you a picture of them doing it in a minute. In this case, they were all carrying spears. So I got out of the taxi, walked towards the church where I was expecting to meet people, and I was greeted with warriors holding spears. And then they started to do this kind of movement. And then one of them lunged forward, and the tip of his spear went up into the air, and he stopped, and honestly, about 3 inches from my face, the tip of the spear. Now, there are 2 things going on in my head. The first is, I'm very tired. And the second is, I've come to talk about Jesus. I don't want to fight. And they're doing this thing, and then from behind the men, a woman appeared, a young woman. She'd be in her late teens, and she stepped forward in the costume of the Māori people, and she placed on the floor in front of me a small carved box. And then gently and very slowly, she stepped backwards, and the men closed in front of her, and up went the spears. And I'm standing there. Now, can I just say, just for a second, let's pause the story for a second. What would you do? I'd had no briefing, nobody told me what this was about. I had no idea what was going on. Thank you, America. You just offered me a coffee. Now, I'm standing there, and I genuinely don't know what to do. And then the woman who'd been in the car with me, she just did this, very, very humbly. She just leant forward and she said, "Pick it up." Pick it up. Standing there, I genuinely have no idea. The whole room's gone quiet, and everything depends on the next thing I do. I stepped forward very carefully and picked up the box. And I stood there for a minute. And then it erupted. The cheer. Boom! And the men stood back, and I was ushered forward. We went into the hall where the people had prepared a banquet. And I was summoned into the head seat at the top of the table, and the people applauded me to my seat. Okay. Now, I had to go to the woman who'd taken me to the airport, from the airport, didn't I? Just a bit later on. And I said, "Would you please tell me what just happened?" When the French landed in New Zealand, before the British, in a period of strange colonialism, which I ought, I suppose, to stand here and apologise for, when the French arrived, they didn't pick up the box. It started a fight. They were pushed off the island. When the British arrived, Captain Cook had on his ship, as Providence would have it, a young man from Tonga. And he was able to say to Cook, "Pick it up." And Cook picked up the box. And that's why the British, forgive me, walked into New Zealand without a fight. Why? Here comes the Māori wisdom, which is very Lenten, and it goes like this. The Māori people knew that if the leader picked up the box, he'd have to put his weapons down to do it. You can't pick up a gift and hold a spear at the same time. You can't pick up a gift and carry weapons. What's the message of Lent? Put down your weapons. Put down your weapons. You're tired people. You're good people. The Lord wants to use you for his purposes, and you're carrying weapons. I'm not accusing you of that. I'm saying it's true of all of us. Our weapons are things like, I'm not worthy, I'm not clever enough, I'm a bit of a sinner, I'm not very reliable, I'm not sure whether I believe it all, I'm confused about things, I'm not like Father, I'm not good enough. There's some of our weapons. You put them down. You say, it's not about you. Put down your weapons and let him love you. Stop it. You're amazing. You're extremely lovable. We spend our whole lives working so hard to justify ourselves, and then we meet a God who says, just put down all your resistance and let me in. Put down your weapons. I learned that from the Maori people, and I'm really grateful to them for that, and now I'm going to show you who they really were. There they are, and they were absolutely terrifying. And the guy at this end with the spear, he was the one who tried to kill me. And there's me having a go, and I don't look very terrifying trying to do a hacker with glasses on. Okay. So, tips. You don't have to be an expert. Okay. One other little story, and then we're going to have a brief break. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. So I turn up sometimes, and sometimes my weapons are a bit different to that. So I'm an ambassador in England for a charity that works around the world. You have plenty of those here. And I found myself in a hospital in a city called Jos in northern Nigeria. I sound very travelled. I spend most of my life at home, honestly. But here I am in a northern city of Nigeria. When I get there, I am ushered to look around a particular hospital. You see, the reason is that they asked me then to go to fundraising events back home and speak about what I've seen. So they were showing me around one of the projects. I'm in a large hospital. I spent the entire morning, meeting patients, meeting doctors, and looking at this impoverished hospital in the north of Nigeria, where they had very little. When I got to the break, ladies and gentlemen, that is at lunchtime, they gave us all a small baguette, a fairly dry piece of bread with a few pieces of chicken in it. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I've worked very hard this morning, actually. I deserve this. And I remember looking at them and saying, do you mind if I go and sit outside? You see, I'm from England and it's very hot here and I like the heat. Do you mind if I sit out the front? And they said, no, you can do that. And I went out and I sat outside the front of this hospital, having worked very hard that morning. Very hard. And I'm sitting outside the front of the hospital, and then as I'm just peeled the bag back to begin eating this baguette, I see over the tip of the bread the biggest pair of brown eyes you've ever seen on a child. He'd be about 5 years old, and he's staring at my baguette. See, you do understand, don't you, that I know what I've got to do, but you also understand that I didn't want to do it. So he's looking at my baguette, and I'm looking at my baguette, and I'm thinking, all right. I smile at him, and then I snap the bread. It's quite hard. I break the bread, and then for a second, it didn't break exactly half. And now I know what I've got to do again, don't I? It's really irritating being a Christian. So I give him the slightly larger piece. And he gently ushered his hand forward, not grabbing, snatching, but gently waited for the bread. As soon as it was in his hand, he ran just as fast as he could away from me. And part of me entered into my second sin that morning, which was, I found myself saying, well, he could have said thank you. As he ran into the dust on the far side of the road, I contented myself that perhaps I'd done some good and began to eat on the bread that was mine, chewing fairly dryly, making my way through the baguette. But then I noticed something in the distance. It was over the road, over a compound wall. There was a small area marked out for football, and he'd run into that area. There was a lot of dust. And then all of a sudden I saw something that challenged my entire Christianity. Because that little boy sat in the middle of a football pitch and began to break his bread into small pieces and was surrounded in seconds by children. Now, what is he doing there, and what is he teaching me? Beautiful little moment of, hello, all right, I know, I've still got a lot to learn. I've still got a lot to learn. And in that stupid story, I want to say, the skill is just to keep learning. A wonderful opportunity tonight to just think about the manner in which we're broken out for others. So here you go, just for a minute. I've got about half an hour to go, and I want to make sure that we get through the material, and I'm still on the introduction. So just for a minute, if you wouldn't mind, I just want you to say to the person next to you, and it sounds like a daft question, but if you just spend just a couple of minutes on it, only very briefly, how do you feel, or what do you think, when I ask you, how do you respond to being called a disciple? That word, you're a disciple. You're not going to be one. You're not on a training course. You actually are one. And when I say that to you, does that make you feel uncomfortable or excited or perplexed or indifferent? Do you think, does that word sound weird or strange to you? What does it mean to you when I say, supposing that's what you are, a disciple? How do you react to that? Now, if you haven't got an answer to that, you'll find the person next to you's got three. So just calm down where they are. We're just going to talk to each other for a couple of minutes, just briefly with each other. Just let's talk about that word for a minute. Okay. So I'm going to offer you just a few hints, because the stories that I've just told you about the Maori people and the hospital story, I'll come back to that at the end. I just want to offer you a few hints, because I want this to be simpler to us than it often seems. Very tempting to imagine being a disciple is somehow beyond us. It's for holier people than us. So let's just take a look at that for a minute. Professor Francesco Botturi, writing about Pope Francis's documents, says this. He says, encounter is the primary knowledge. It's the knowledge of the heart. To become encounter incarnate. To be met rather than understood. Now he's talking about prayer there. And he's saying, instead of waiting until you understand everything, The skill here is to have a relationship. Now, I know this sounds kind of strange to some people, but actually the real question is, and forgive me, please don't let this sound trite, but have you met him, the Lord? And I don't mean this in some kind of weird way, like he appeared to you. I mean, do you know him? Somewhere deep down in the recesses of your heart, do you catch yourself talking to him? Does he accompany you? For Francis, the disciple is somebody in relationship with the Lord and in a living relationship with the Lord. I like this. He says, I invite all Christians everywhere at this very moment to a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ. Now look, I'm going to share one with you, and it's very personal, and I hope when I do it, it'll only take 2 minutes. I hope you don't think I'm mad, because when you start talking like this, it's a bit tempting to, well, maybe I'm being very British now, but in England we don't like to talk about feelings because we don't have them. They're banned. But it went a little bit like this. I wonder if you recognise a version of this story in your own experience. This doesn't make me better than you. Okay, it's a Tuesday in February. It's 7:30 in the evening. You need to know that. Where I live, at 7:30 in the evening in February, it's dark and it's raining. And I'm sitting in the lounge of our house on a sofa. And on the other sofa, there's 2 large lounge seats in our lounge. On the other sofa, my wife is sitting, Alison, and she's absolutely lost in a book. Lost in a book. When my wife really reads, and it's her idea of a perfect holiday is a hot beach and 3 good books. And she's lost in a book. And I know she's lost in it because when she really reads, she tucks her legs underneath herself in a way I can't even bend. And she's reading this book and she's lost in it. Now, in the corner of the room is my 12-year-old son, and he's killing Romans in a game called Rome Total War. He's annihilating entire races. See, we're a good Christian family. And then sitting on another corner of the lounge is my son and my daughter. They'd be about 8 and 6, and they're fighting with each other over who has the control for the television set. And it's a Tuesday in February. And it is no more than that. And I'm not praying. And I'm going to tell you now that I had an experience of joy. And I'm going to make it sound like I heard a voice, and I didn't hear a voice. I just felt something. And it went like this. It just went, David Wells. This is as good as your life will ever get. And if you don't see it now, you never will. And I realised that I was weeping. And I was feeling an experience, a glimpse, a brief glimpse of heaven. And then it left. And it was so profound that I almost said goodbye. But the reason I know it was God is that I didn't need any more of it. It wasn't an easy fix. I remember sitting on that sofa and remembering that in those stupid little moments was the point of my life, really. And the reason I share it with you, it was a Tuesday in February when it was raining. I think sometimes we imagine that being a disciple is being spectacular or successful or having admirers or or somehow being otherworldly, but for me it's been a very ordinary journey of discovering that actually the real joy is sitting right in front of me, and on a good day I can see it. A brief encounter with the one who tells me he loves me, to be met rather than understood. Now please, don't put me on a pedestal. That wasn't because I'm a good person, it was a gift. And God wants that gift for all of us. St. Francis de Sales spoke of a heart speaking to a heart. And sometimes what Pope Francis is saying, would you open yourself up to that voice and allow him to speak to you? And not to be too afraid of asking. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's accompanied by tenderness. It's not a chaotic or even necessarily a sensational experience. Generally, it's a very mild one. One of the virtues that Pope Francis is trying to encourage in the Church is tenderness. It's a certain closeness. And the root of this word tenderness doesn't come from the Latin word where you get a tender bruise. It's not that tenderness. The root of this word tenderness comes from an Old English word, and it's where we get the tender from a railway engine. It's a different tender. It's that tender. The thing that carries the coal. Understand? And when Pope Francis is talking about tenderness, he's talking about closeness. God is very close to you. If you like, the tender behind the engine of your life. And so this is always an intimacy. It's a story of closeness and proximity. It's not necessarily a story of tenderness in the way that a bruise is tender. So what Pope Francis is calling for is for us to renew that sense of closeness in our prayer lives. Now, what's the consequence of that? Well, he suggests that the closer we grow to him in intimacy, the closer we begin to grow in intimacy with each other. And here comes the mission part. That you can't get closer to him without getting closer to each other. And as I said to you yesterday, that can be extremely challenging. You're invited to the eternal banquet, but have you seen who else is invited? So the closer we come to the Lord, the closer we come to our brothers and sisters. I want you to think just for a minute, a little bit, about that. How many people in your life are you close to? How many people in your life do you trust? It's a challenging one, I think. I think that my number is a bit smaller than I'd like it to be. And so gradually as we grow closer in faith, Jesus calls us really to go out from ourselves, to let down some of those barriers, to put down some of those weapons, to allow people in. It's an intimacy that moves through us all. So the first thing we do is we try not to put barriers up between us and one another. In his document, Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis uses this word accompaniment, to dare to grow closer to the broken and the needy. The first step is an encounter and an embrace, a sense of belonging, rather than belonging after all the necessary changes have taken place. Do you mind if I just show you a very rude picture? Well, I'm going to anyway. So this is the nude in front of the garden by Pablo Picasso. It's 1956. It's worth £7.5 million. That's about $10 million. And just take a look at it for a minute. The reason I wanted to put it up there for you is that it's actually a painting that was made famous about 7 years ago because somebody put a knife through it. Now they put a knife through it in the... I don't know, look, Pablo Picasso doesn't really work for me. He might work for you. I'm not really passionate about his painting, but I wanted to show you it because somebody put a knife through it. Now, can I just tell you, what was it worth the next day? It was worth $10 million the next day. Now, why do I do this? Just go with it for a second. Have you been online and seen these wonderful websites? Some people, you know, can I tell you how old I am? I am so old that I remember a time when people had a thing called a camera. Yeah, it was a camera, it wasn't a phone. And what you did is you went on holiday and you took 24 pictures and then you sent them off to a place where they were developed and printed. And then they came back to you, and most of them were of your thumb. Now, because we took pictures like that, we put them in a tin under a bed in a spare room. But then one day, 20 years later, we got them out and we discovered that they were a bit damaged. And now you can go online to certain sites and they'll repair your photographs for you. Now, as an image of church, it's meant to be us. And it goes a little bit like that. We're all just a bit broken. We're all just a bit jaded. The person next to you is wounded by life, not necessarily profoundly, but nobody in this room is perfect. The person sitting next to you is amazing, precious, desperately loved by God, but they're not perfect. They're really not. And here's the thing, that we were born, really, to not only grow closer to the Lord, but in growing closer to Him, to somehow restore people. You know, our parishes are meant to be places where the broken and the vulnerable and the confused and the misunderstood and the non-believers and the sinners of our community feel at home. And then that happens. People are restored gradually, slowly, gently, simply by being close to us. As we grow closer to the Lord, He will grow closer to us. I love that idea that the church is about restoring people, healing people, bringing them back to fullness, to grace, to completion, to live the life we were meant to live. Did you enjoy the phrase in today's reading, you stiff-necked people? Did you hear it? When were you last stiff-necked? Vinegar face? See, we've got that language where we're hard on ourselves and then we're hard on each other. We come to Mass and we bring what Liam Kelly once wrote in his book. He says the problem in England, and whenever I say this, it seems to set alarms off. Oh, I love that. Please don't worry, everybody's just grateful it's not their phone. Sometimes painful things happen in a community, don't they? And you're suffering one at the moment. And that's what we're called to, you know. For people who are worried, for people who are upset, for people who feel broken by things. And the purpose of this is that the closer we grow to the Lord, the more we become about healing and restoration. It wasn't meant for us. It was meant for the others. Now, Pope Benedict put it beautifully. I love this! He said, the programme of Jesus, that's a loose translation. It's not a brilliant word programme. I'm not quite sure that's what he meant. The programme of Jesus is a heart which sees. This heart sees where love is needed and acts accordingly. Now that's what I want to ask you as a community to pray for. To pray for where love is needed and to act accordingly. To pray for where love is needed and to act accordingly. That's what you were born for. And the strangest thing is that the more we do that, strangely, the more we cheer up. It's a strange economy. Now this is Debbie, Latoya, Sylvia and Emma. They're in one of our schools. They're 5 moms who all have children with profound learning difficulties. And we discovered that we didn't quite know how to help them. And then one day we were chatting with them and we said, do you know, they got together and we said, what do you need? And they told us something amazing. They said, we need each other. We need each other. So the school provided them with a room, just one morning a week, where they could sit. The parents in the school bought the women the best coffee-making machine in the town. They provided coffee and cake and gave these women a place to meet once a week for half an hour. This is what they said. The hardest thing in life is admitting you need help. Because everybody else seems okay. We don't feel we're being judged because we can't control our children. That's Mr. Gill, the school principal, and all the staff have been wonderful to us. I come away thinking, I've got this, I'm going to be okay, I can do this. Pope Francis says, the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness, it needs proximity. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It's useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has a high cholesterol and about the level of his blood sugars. You have to heal his wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds. Heal the wounds. And you have to start from the ground up. That's what we were born for. And the closer a parish gets to that mission, the more messy, dirty and exciting it becomes. And all of a sudden, the room starts to fill up with people who make you uncomfortable. And then you know you're a disciple. Pope Francis finishes Amoris Laetitia with this. Don't think you need a big plan. A mustard seed, small as it is, becomes a great tree. And this teaches us to see the disproportion between our actions and their effects. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we do what Mother Teresa says. We do small things with great love. We do small things with great love. You don't need a big plan. You start with you and your life. Now just for a second, I'm not going to ask you to speak. I want just 30 seconds of silence. I want you to think of a person in your life. Sorry, I'm very emotional tonight. I don't like it at all. I want you to think of a person in your life. You don't have to name them. This is just between you and you. And I want you to think of a person who you can love just a bit better. Because that's where this starts tonight. It starts with that person. Don't start thinking you need some grand plan. You're going to start with one person and you're going to love them better. It could be a colleague, it could be a partner, it could be a child, it could be a parent, it could be somebody who irritates you. Right? Because I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Just want you to close your eyes for a second. I want you to think of that person. I want you to pray for them. Small things with great love. Small things with great love. So we're coming into land. We've got 8 minutes to go. At this point, I like it when people say to me, I agree with what you're saying, Dave, but it's very hard. And this is where we go back to the Lord again. You see, because we say we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. You don't have to rely on your own power. So this Pentecost, we're going to pray for the strength to be disciples. That's what we're going to do. We call upon the Holy Spirit to give us the courage we need to be like Stephen. We don't have to be stoned to death. You're pleased to hear that. You might sometimes find that just as you start to love people better, you get the worst of reactions. And then you feel a bit disappointed or that you're failing in some way, and we go back to the source of the one who gives us strength. Father kindly took me to a vineyard yesterday. It was really lovely. I love going to vineyards. And one of the things I learned in France about vineyards is this. The vine is one of the few plants that you can slice and place a dead branch into a living one and it will live again. It's called to graft. It's where we get the idea of a skin graft. When you feel a bit down or a bit disillusioned, or a bit confused, you just go to the source of life. You say, Lord, I'm falling asleep again. I'm trying to love people better, it's not working. And you go back to the vine, and you remember that you're just a branch. That's all you are. So, I've got one more story I want to tell you, but this is the last time I'm going to ask you a question. Is that right? I've got one more story I want to tell you to finish on. But before I do that, I want to ask you one more question. It comes from St. Francis de Sales, the patron saint of teachers. This is my favourite St. Francis de Sales quote. He says, "More flies are attracted to a spoonful of honey than a barrel full of vinegar." Now, what does that mean? It means that thank you for those of you that have come tonight. Thank you for those of you that have come for 2 evenings and for those of you who've come for 3. But here's the question. Whether you just came tonight or you've come for 2 evenings or 3 evenings, where's the spoon of honey? You see, by the time we get in the car and we're heading home, you lose 50% of everything you've heard, and by the time you get home, you've lost another 45% of it. The skill, ladies and gentlemen, in a mission is to find the honey. Now, what I mean by that is, what have you heard, what have you thought, or what have you felt over the last 3 days that you don't want to forget? It could be one picture, one slide, one quote, one idea, one conversation. You don't need to remember it all. I'm asking you to find the honey. Some of you have given up a lot of time, put a lot of energy into this. More flies are attracted to a spoonful of honey than a barrel full of vinegar. Put the vinegar down. What have you heard, thought, felt, or listened to that you'd like to be a fridge magnet? That you meet again, that you go, oh, I need to think of that a bit more, I need to hold on to that thought, I need to be reminded of that idea. Over the last 3 days, you've taken in almost 3.5 hours of theology. You're going to lose 3 hours, 25 minutes, I think. So just with the person next to you, just for a minute, have you thought something, felt something, said something, listened to something that you don't want to forget? Just for a couple of minutes, one more story, and then we'll come to a close. Have a quick conversation. With somebody else, please carry that conversation on. Just have that conversation. What's happened over the last 3 days, which is of any genuine, sincere help to you, that you would want to continue? You know, that's how these things start. It's very tempting to imagine you need to change the world or do something really big. Often it's doing small things with great love that changes the universe. Honestly, we could do a whole evening on that. I want to finish with a story that tries to sum up the last 3 days, and then I'm going to hand over to Father. So because this whole experience of working with Father Tom has come from LA, I want to finish with an LA story, if you don't mind. It's only a brief story, but it goes a little bit like this. I was invited in 1998 to go to the Congress in LA. I mentioned to you, on the first evening that I turned up expecting about 50 people in my seminar and had 1,000. And I mentioned that I stood in the arena in front of all those people. Never done anything like that before in my life. Well, there's another story. That on the first evening, I went to the first mass that I'd ever been to in Los Angeles. And because I'm English, I made sure I was sitting at the back. And I was a very long way up high up in this stadium. And I looked down, and this happened. Now, I can only gesture it because I can't describe it. It went a little bit like this. The Cardinal came into the arena, and on either side of him were the 2 women who'd organised the conference. And they were about to open this event of over 200 workshops, 12 keynotes, and 11 different masses. It was a big event. But behind them was this. They were a group of what I would now call liturgical dancers. Have you ever come across liturgical dancers? Okay, do you have them here? Not yet. Okay. Just kidding. So, no, don't get cross. It's all right. But it went like this. So the Cardinal is there, and the 2 women are on side, and behind him were 12 liturgical dancers. I'm going to try and do it. So please bear in mind I'm English, and I'm 56. And it went a little bit like this. They were coming behind, and they were doing this. And I have to tell you, they were beautifully choreographed and absolutely athletic, and all 12 of them were men. Now, I'm at the back of this big arena, and I'm thinking, what is that? Where I come from, I grew up in an English mining town. I couldn't think of a single man in the whole of England who would come into a church. So do you understand? Forgive me, this is not a political statement, but I was having the same kind of emotion I attached to Donald Trump, which is, I have no problem. It's just that idea that I don't quite understand him, and at the same time, I can't stop watching him. There's something about Donald Trump that's compulsive. But these dancers took me into this same place, you see. I have to tell you, they were profoundly athletic and graceful. but they were definitely not my experience. All right? So on the second day, there was something about the experience that said, investigate further. So I went into the arena, but took courage into my own hands and found some empty seats quite close to the stage, where I could see more clearly. And sure enough, the whole Mass began again, this time with both men and women liturgically dancing. And I was watching it, and I have to tell you this about this scene, because it was amazing. They were absolutely sincere. They would say that their dance was a prayer, and I would say to you that I believe them. Okay? At the same time, I was absolutely horrified. Just because I couldn't imagine in a million years doing the whole liturgical dance. Now, as I sat down to the left of the stage, a man called Richard Sherry, who's very well known in California, began to lead the music. And the Mass on the second day was coming from the Black African-American experience. Two women stood up, and I tell you, they had the voices of Aretha Franklin. And I sat there and I listened to this soulful music, and I was absolutely moved by how you could fill an entire arena with just two voices. Very powerful. And then Richard Cherry, the leader and conductor of the orchestra, turned to me and did this. Now, this is why the English sit at the back. I'm sitting in this chair going, oh, I hate this. Do they know I'm English? Are they going to pray for me? And nervously, gingerly, tentatively, anxiously, I stood to my feet. And it was at that moment that I realised that I was in the choir. So I was standing. It's not over. It's really over. Now, the second thing is, everybody in the choir is black. And they have been working on this piece for 6 months. And then they get this lemon all the way from England. And they've all got the same tops on, except for me. And then they started doing this. Are you ready? I'm not going to do it well, but they started doing this. I have to understand. I'm standing there and I'm thinking, oh no. They start singing. And I was stupid enough to pretend I know the words. And then I started thinking, actually, I'm quite cool, really. And then I realised, they're starting to laugh with me, and I am actually moving with them. I don't look as good as them, and I don't sound as good as them, but I'm enjoying this. And then I realise I'm dancing in a church. And then I look up, and just above the altarpiece is a 6-foot video screen. And I realised that the entire auditorium of 10,000 people are laughing. shortly. And I'll tell you what this is about. I discovered if we had more evenings, I would talk to you about the foolishness of Christianity. The foolishness of Christianity goes like this. Do you know something? You wake up, you cheer up, and you fall in love. And you fall over, and you get up again. And one day you discover you'll do things you think are crazy, because actually life is better than being stiff-necked. Life is better than being stiff-necked. God meant us to enjoy the life we have, and will give us the joy we need to sustain the suffering we meet. This is not an easy road, it's a hard one. But if you can dance the dance, don't take that literally, dance the dance of life, you will discover that He was there all the time, whispering into your ear, I love you, put down your weapons and let me in. And in that way, one day you discover that you can be transformed. Stupid man. If anybody wants the slides, email me.